So what is that context? First, a little bit about the Quranic view of Islam, the Quranic meaning of Islam, and the Quranic approach to other religions. And we've already talked about this in prior lectures. So today, the term Islam is often taken to mean the religion preached and taught by the Prophet Muhammad, which has then evolved and institutionalized over the last 1400 years. That's what Islam tends to mean today. But in the Quran, the meaning of the word Islam and Muslim is somewhat different than the meaning of these terms as used today. And we've talked about this before. The word Islam itself in Arabic means submission or surrender. You have cognate words in the Aramaic language used by Syriac Christians, as we've already seen. The word aslam, for example, in Aramaic. So here in the Quran, Islam does not mean a formal institutionalized religion, which that's a meaning that would come later. Dr. Juan Cole, building off the work of Dr. Imran al-Badawi, has discussed and talked about how the word Islam in the Quran seems to mean monotheistic tradition or primordial monotheism. And in this sense, Islam is the Arabic equivalent of the Aramaic word mashtul manuta and the Greek word paradosis. Both those terms mean tradition. So according to Juan Cole, in an article that we've already read for this class, the word Islam means tradition of some sort, a perennial ecumenical monotheistic tradition. And as he further explains, if Islam means the tradition of monotheism, Islam includes Muhammad's religion or Muhammad's teaching, but it also is somewhat more comprehensive and universal than just what Muhammad taught. A good way to sort of express this visually is where you have these three circles. One circle is Muhammad's teaching, so the creeds and the laws and rituals that Muhammad taught in his own time, the Jewish tradition and the Christian tradition. And Islam would be the common monotheistic perennial essence of all three of these traditions. So they are all, you could say, expressions of Islam. Judaism is an expression of Islam. Christianity is an expression of Islam. Muhammad's teachings in the Quran are an expression of Islam, and they would claim to be the most updated, most authentic expression of Islam. So when the Quran has a verse like this, indeed the religion in the sight of Allah, God, is Islam, we would take Islam here in the 7th century context to mean the monotheistic tradition, the monotheistic essence of many different religions. But what will happen, as we've talked about in the first half of this semester, by the mid-8th century, when you have an expanding Islamic empire ruled by the Umayyads and then the Abbasids later after them, the term Islam changes in its meaning within the community. So now Islam comes to mean Muhammad's religion, Muhammad's teachings, Muhammad's laws. It's no longer seen as a primordial, perennial, monotheistic orientation. So according to the new understanding of Islam, which starts sometime in the 8th century, Judaism and Christianity are different religions. They are not expressions of Islam. Only Muhammad's teaching is an expression of Islam, and therefore only the followers of Muhammad would be called Muslims, whereas according to the Quran, many people who lived before Muhammad, including prophets like Abraham and Moses, they would all be called Muslims. But in the later understanding, that is not the case. Be that as it may, it's also important to look at what the Quran's view of other religions actually is, irrespective of what the word Islam meant and what it later came to mean. In general, what we find is that the Quran's view of salvation, of who is saved and who is not saved, is universalist and anti-exclusivist. So exclusivism is this idea that only the members of one religion or one faith group will go to heaven. Right? That is exclusivism. The Quran disagrees with that. So in Surah 2, verse 111, 112, the claim that none will go to paradise except a Jew or a Christian is refuted and rejected by the Quran. The Quran, in opposition to this exclusivism, says whoever submits his or her faith to God, being a doer of good, uh, will have his or her reward with God, with their Lord. So it's basically saying that the requirement for salvation to enter heaven is to submit to God and do good deeds. And two other verses say this in more explicit terms. In Surah 2 and in Surah 5. Surah 5, of course, as some of you know, is the last surah of the Quran to be revealed through Muhammad. And both of these verses say that those who believe, those who have faith in Muhammad's revelation, as well as those who are Jews and Christians and Sabians, and whoever has faith or belief in God and the day of judgment and acts righteously, does good deeds, all of those people will be rewarded by God and they have nothing to fear. So these are very clear that the Quran believes that really all monotheists who act righteously, do good deeds, are eligible for salvation, and it's really God at the end of the day who will decide who goes to heaven and who doesn't. But simply being a follower of Muhammad or simply being a Muslim is not a guaranteed access pass to paradise or to heaven. It's in this context, also in Surah 5, that the Quran instructs Muhammad's community on how they should behave with respect to other religious communities. So it says, to each of you we have prescribed a law and a way, and had God willed, he would have made you one community. But he intended to test you in what he has given you, so compete together in good works. So the Quran here is basically saying that diversity in religious belief and practice is something that God has willed or intended. That it is not an accident that we have different religious traditions, that this is the way God wanted it to be. And therefore, the proper response to religious diversity is not to oppress one another or to be intolerant, but to actually accept that diversity and then compete together in good works. And that's a very interesting idea. And one scholar of the Quran, Thomas Hoffman, last year gave a paper at a conference where he talked about how the Quran is telling people of different religions to engage in an ethical context of good works. That all monotheists are supposed to sort of perform or sort of take part in a competition to do good, which is an adaptation, in Hoffman's words, of the Greco-Roman tradition of the Agon, the Olympics, basically. So it's talking about an Olympics of good deeds. And I'm mentioning all this because this is the background behind the Qur'anic discourse about Jesus, because the Quran is quite critical of some Christian beliefs on Jesus. It criticizes many Christian theological ideas. But beneath that criticism is this sort of Quranic ethic of religious diversity and acceptance and tolerance of other religions. So just because the Quran condemns certain points of Christian theology, it does not mean that the Quran thinks Muslims or believers should not tolerate Christians. So that's just something to keep in mind. But now let's be more specific. What does